This creepypasta is called the Bunnyman Bridge. Back in 1903, buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton, Virginia, there used to be an asylum. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area. Around 300 or so population-wise, it was a very small town nonetheless. People didn't like the idea of having an asylum miles down the road, so they all got together and signed a petition for the asylum to be relocated somewhere else. The petition passed and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Lorton Prison, a temporary facility for convicts to stay in until they are appropriately sentenced. In the autumn of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into a bus meant to transport them to Lorton. Somewhere during the drive, not too far from where they left, the driver had swerved to avoid something and the bus had started to tip. Soon it was rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured but managed to escape the bus. They fled into the night towards the woods, and the next morning, a local police investigation begun. They started rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, and days turned into weeks, and then the weeks turned into months. And everyone was recovered after 4 months, except for 2 people, Marcus A. Walster and Douglas J. Griffin. Every now and again during the search for both men, the police found dead rabbits, and all of them half-eaten and dismembered. Finally, they located Marcus, dead by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as the Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand, he held a man-made hammer/knife-like tool with a sharp rock as the head and a sturdy branch as the handle. They thought nothing of it, and didn't care how he died, only that he was apprehended and they no longer had to worry about him. They named Marcus the Bunnyman, as they believed that he and his tool were responsible for the abundance of deceased wildlife. Later on, they realized that they had assigned the moniker to the wrong person. Still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding dead, half-eaten rabbits. Eventually, they gave Douglas the Bunnyman title instead. Months passed by and the police gave up the search. Everybody assumed that the Bunnyman was dead by now, if not gone, so they went on with their life in the small town. Come October, people started to see dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue, and started to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids went over to the bridge to drink and do whatever kids their age in the early 20th century did. Once midnight came around, most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge, 2 boys and a girl. At exactly midnight, a bright light shone from the bridge's opening, right where the kids were. A few seconds later, they were all dead. Their throats were slashed with the same type of tool that was found next to the first escapee, Marcus. But not only that, but they were cut up and down their chest and gutted like a fish. The Bunnyman then hung the boys from one end of the bridge with ropes around their necks, hanging from the overpass so that their legs dangled in view of any passing cars. The girl was hung the same way on the other side of the bridge. This happened in 1905. After that, no one saw or heard anything from the mysterious Bunnyman for another year. Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remembered the incident that had occurred 1 year ago at the bridge, his bridge. That night, 7 teens were at the bridge right before midnight, thinking little of it. 6 remained inside while 1, Adrian Hatala, remained a good distance away, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing had happened again. She was the only one to witness a dim light walking the railroad track just before midnight, stopping right above the bridge as the clock turned 12, then disappearing at the same time that a bright flash came from inside. She heard the deafening sounds of terrified screaming coming from within the bridge. It lasted only seconds, and moments later, the teens were all hung from one end of the bridge in the same way as the corpse a year earlier. Horrified, Adrian ran home and refused to tell all of what she saw. She could only spatter out words and incoherent mumblings that the people of her town had pieced together to decipher her story. No one understood it or believed her. They charged her with the teen murders and locked her up in the asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened again, but it was 9 teenagers this time. On a Halloween night, once again, Adrian was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was too far gone to even have a normal life. So she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of reported shock. No one knows exactly what caused the said shock, but supposedly she died in her sleep, dreaming of that one dreaded night again. Perhaps the Bunnyman finally got to her. More murders were to take place, however, after the murders in 1913, most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. When 1943 rolled around, 6 teenagers went strolling out to the bridge on Halloween night. A couple hours later, all of them were dead the same way as all the others. Investigations took place, but as usual, nothing was ever discovered. In 1976, the same situation occurred, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that had occurred since then was in 1987. Jeanette Charlotter was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween had finally come around, and they had gone out driving to enjoy the night after invading their children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 p.m. at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see it for themselves, and were the only ones who actually withstood the Bunnyman. It was nearly midnight, and they had waited around an hour or so when Janet started getting a little scared. They all had been pulling pranks on each other, jumping out of bushes, and even screaming at each other, so she was already a little bit worked up. Midnight hit, and by this stage, she was in total panic. She was almost out of the bridge when the lights got really bright inside. When that happened, her body was halfway outside the bridge. She saw her skin begin to tear at her chest, but nothing was piercing her. Eventually, she managed to escape, completely horrified. She hit a hanging body and knocked herself out, and when she awoke, she discovered that she had been bleeding, but luckily, the cut had just been made. It wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. Since then, Janet has been seen sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in the direction towards the bridge a couple miles down. From then on, the story remains untouched and unsolved.